Throughout my life, I've had a lot of different jobs. In my teens and early adult years, I worked blue-collar jobs. And then when I got into my mid-20s, I entered the white-collar world and became a lawyer, which I've been doing ever since. And throughout my life, I've encountered many types of people on these jobs, and inevitably, I was introduced to some assholes. Now, it didn't matter whether it was a white-collar job or a blue-collar job. I unfortunately ran into a certain type of boss. And this boss is more than just your typical asshole. This boss is so insecure with their own abilities that they are completely incompetent and unqualified to be in a leadership position. And what I discovered is that these types of bosses would often do one of these three things. So I'm going to go over these three red flags with you today, so you can look out for them in the future and not have to work for an unqualified boss that has no business overseeing you. So that being said, let's get into it. So this is a situation where your boss assigns you a task, but at the very last minute, he pulls that task away from you. Now this is despite the fact that you're completely capable and qualified to do the assignment, but your boss nonetheless claims that you don't have the experience. Having this happen to me, I can attest it's a very frustrating thing to happen for an employee, especially when you've been preparing and working hard for this assignment for a long time, and it's just snatched in an instant. This happening often could mean many things, none of which are good. For one, it could mean that your boss doesn't trust you. And that means that your boss is either already looking for your replacement or is too incompetent to let you go. Because if your boss really doesn't trust you, you shouldn't be there. And neither should you work for someone who isn't able to trust you when you know that you're a trustworthy person. But on the other hand, if your boss does trust you, but keeps taking your assignments anyway, then this is still really bad, maybe even worse, because that means your boss is likely threatened by you and needs to create a situation to make you feel incompetent and unqualified. Good leaders are confident in their abilities, that they know that they should be in that leadership role, so there's no need to put you below them. They're confident that they should be at the position they're at. But those who aren't qualified to be leaders, they know they suck ass at their jobs, so they create situations to try to bring you below them. In my experience when this has happened, I would notice that my dipshit boss would often take assignments from me that were easy for him to do. But when it came to difficult assignments, I was left alone. How strange. Now, if you realize this is going on, you need to get out quickly, because staying at this place is seriously going to hinder your growth in your career. Problems happen. We've all heard of Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong, and this is true across all industries. We can't control what is not in our control, but what we can control is how we respond to problems when they arise. So if a boss gets angry at a problem that wasn't in your control but blames it on you, it indicates two things. One is the obvious, and that's your boss doesn't care about how the reaction affects you. And this boss is way too dumb to realize that this is going to create a major rift in your relationship, because this screams to you incompetence. It shows that they do not have the leadership skills to make that determination when it's a good or bad time to reprimand an employee. And this notion of incompetence gets into my second point, which is when a boss gets mad about something like this, it also shows that the boss is likely creating problems that don't exist to maintain control over you. So just like with pulling assignments away from you, it is likely that they feel threatened by your presence. They're worried you're going to surpass them or go off to someplace better. You know, it's funny that I noticed that a lot of the same people who would be mad at me for things that weren't in my control would also be reasonable at times when I would make small mistakes that were actually my fault. So if this is happening at your work, look out for those reactions. If they're sometimes reasonable, it might mean that they're actually a little glad that you made a mistake, because then they can justify in their own heads that they're qualified as a leader, that they should be above you. Also, look out if their reasonable response to mistakes is inconsistent. Do they sometimes get mad, but other times don't? But you're not really sure why, because all the problems are equally as insignificant. This is another red flag because it shows that your boss is unpredictable. And they're unpredictable because they're not acting objectively. They're acting based on their emotions. A boss who's only pleasant when they're having a good day is not a good boss. A good leader will take accountability for their actions and will be equally as hard on themselves as they are hard on you. They should follow their own rules, because if they don't, that means they believe the rules don't apply to them, and that means they have no respect for you. A thing to look out for is if they get angry at you for making a particular mistake, but when they make the same mistake, they just shrug it off. It's a sign of a weak leader, and you shouldn't have to put up with that hypocrisy. Now let me give you an example of a boss that I had that didn't follow his own rules. I had this boss who was a major micromanager. I mean, every document that I created, he would have to look over, however insignificant. And I'm talking about simple letters, emails, even my notes he'd have to sign off on. And granted, I was already an attorney for a few years, and I worked on my own 30 to 40 cases at a time at prior law firms, and I worked on these cases alone and without any issue. So all this micromanaging was very unnecessary. And worst of all, since he had to approve everything, nothing would ever get done because this guy was rarely at the office. And I remember there were a lot of days that you would come in at 10 a.m. and leave at 2 p.m., and then call my office phone at 5:30 p.m. just to make sure that I was still there. And when he called, it was clearly to see if I was there, because he would repeat things we discussed earlier that day. There were always useless calls. And I remember one day when he called the office, and it was around 6 p.m. and it was in the summer. And he was on his cell phone, and I could hear noises in the background. And I listened closely, and I heard someone's 4-iron hitting a golf ball. This guy was on the fucking golf course. And it was at that moment that I decided that I was going to have to quit and look for a new job, because I couldn't possibly work for someone who I had no respect for. Having a boss who's a micromanager is one thing, but having a boss who is putting on the facade of a micromanager is something I wasn't going to put up with. And this would have been a different story if he didn't call me and entrusted me to get the work done, which I had no problem doing before. There's a saying that you can be one of two people in the legal field. You can be an incompetent who is nice, or you can be one who is competent who is an asshole. What you cannot be is an incompetent asshole. So if you think you're working with an incompetent asshole and you recognize any of the 3 red flags that I mentioned, then I would seriously consider getting out of there, because take it from me, it's really not worth it. Thank you everyone for watching, and for those of you with incompetent asshole bosses, I wish you good luck with your job search.